am reading The Laird and the Lady. It is a novel by Joan Marshall Grant. She used to write books of her previous incarnations, but this is a fiction. It was published 1949 and started in a French chateau. Marylda got married to Rowan, or Rowan got married to Marylda, and they are now in Scotland at his family's seat, a big castle, Castle Cloud. We are in the second part, and it is today Monday, the 20th of May. The sun is shining. The Bridesmaid. I was a plain child, said Georgina, and in due course I became a plain girl. When people tried to be kind, they said I had nice hair, ignoring the fact that it was straight for all its yard of length. They also said I had good skin. Only someone who has suffered from freckles has any idea quite how much that hurts. I washed my face in sheep's milk, which was remarkably difficult to get, for sheep resent being milked, especially into the unlikely receptacle of a straw boater. One could not risk being seen carrying a bucket to the moor. The application of strawberries, furtively gathered and mashed with the handle of a toothbrush, proved equally ineffective. The courage required to climb to the wishing stone at midnight of midsummer was also not inconsiderable. She paused to light another cigarette from the stub of the last. Perhaps I underrate the wishing stone. My real prayer was always that Hector would marry me. The desire to have curly hair and no freckles was never more than a means to an end. I can never remember a time when being noticed by Hector was not more important than being approved by God. The first thing I can see, looking back into that awful loneliness called early childhood, is Hector, who then must have been about 12, holding me on the rocking horse because the leathers were too long for my fat legs. The first trout I caught was a tribute to Hector. I was 8, and whenever there was a thunderstorm I knew that it was God shouting that I had lied when I told him, Hector, not God, though at the time they were indistinguishable, that I caught it on a dry fish, on a dry fly instead of tickling it on a hot day, when the poor fish thought itself safe in a shallow pool. Before I was 16 I was allowed my own butt on the 12th, and women didn't shoot in those days, so it meant more than it would now. But my father had no son, and brought me up to wear the kilt and pretend that I was as good or better than any man. It was the fashion to despise the feminine when I was young. "You are only a girl" was a taunt that stabbed deep. I suppose it sounds funny that I still ate crusts to make my hair curl in the same autumn that I got my first royal. I stalked him for 7 hours, and then to my shame was sick when I saw him well-lodged. I was presented at Holyrood, and my coming out ball was at Cloud. Everyone seemed to take it for granted that eventually I would marry Hector. There was a lot of entertaining at Cloud in those days. Vicky came the year before Hector's mother died, and her bedroom was specially decorated in tartan, even to the carpets. Although I was rather too young, Thunder usually asked me to be hostess, and was annoyed if I didn't spend most of my time at Cloud. Hector always treated me as his young cousin, but no one expected anything more intimate until people were formally engaged. When he went to London and stayed on for a season, he wrote to me, gay, casual letters describing the balls he had been to, gossip about house parties where the Prince of Wales was staying. He always referred to the Prince as Eddie Tum Tum. Mrs. Langtry was the resigning beauty, and it all sounded very daring and remote. But I didn't worry because it was taken for granted that young men sowed what was politely called wild oats, which were a necessary preliminary to matrimony. Mother took me to Edinburgh and bought me some clothes which I considered enormously elegant. She was quite pleased with me that summer, for I gave up what she called my hoydenish ways, and took an interest in housekeeping and infinite trouble with my appearance. I always wondered if she knew I used to put on 3 pairs of woolen combinations and run uphill in a vain attempt to improve my figure. But all that happened was that I got still more sturdy and was driven to sleeping in corsets laced so tight that I could hardly breathe, in the hope of reducing my waist to the longed-for 18 inches. I could never make it less than 22, and that only by a martyrdom of hunger. Eventually Mother became alarmed at my lack of appetite, and I had to take a tonic, which made me even more ravenous. I got to the stage when I used to dream of buns plump with cream and jam. Sitting at meals was a torture, which course after course refused as an offering to elegance. It was only another stage of the anti-freckle prayers and the crust marathons, futile sacrifices on the altar of Hector. When I was 17, there was to be the usual house party for the 12th. I planned the menus, read Mrs. Beeton as a Bible, kept Thunder in a good temper, which was no small task when his gout was bad, made sure there would be enough smilax to go with the sweet peas. We Victorians had an almost religious reverence for smilla, and no dinner table was complete without it, and ticked off the days on a calendar I kept hidden in my glove box. It was a most revealing document, days until I see Hector again, decorated with a garland of wild roses in watercolour, the only artistic achievement I had managed to learn. Hector wrote to say that he was bringing an American and his daughter, to whom he owed hospitality. I was excited at the idea of entertaining Americans. I was not sure whether they would expect covered wagons to meet them at the station and a tribe of Indians whooping outside the window to make them feel at home. So you see, I was entirely unprepared for Emily. She was not very tall, but supremely elegant. She brought 5 trunks and 2 hat boxes and a crocodile dressing case with gold fittings. Her clothes came from Worth and Revlon, Frère and Calotte. She had a beautiful voice and sang after people had pleaded for her to sing when the men joined us after dinner. She was enormously rich, at least her people were rich, which came to the same thing. For the first few days I tried to pretend that Hector couldn't be in love with a woman who didn't understand Cloud. I thought, when I remembered how we could fish and shoot, how we belonged together, he'd forget Emily. But I had to arrange all the details of the ball which announced their engagement. It was on the 21st of August, 1897. There were 7 courses, and the freezing salt got under the raspberry ice. She sat on Hector's right and I on his left. She wore white lace with the Cadbury rubies that Thunder had given to her as an engagement present. I had on Prussian blue watered silk, which was a little too tight across the bust, but everyone knows that blue is so becoming to red hair. Mother lent me her seed-pearled necklace. I think she realized that it wasn't a very easy evening for me. I tried to curse Emily, but it was just as futile as the freckle cure. If she had been jealous, I think it would have been less impossible, but she was so intolerably kind. She insisted on treating me as though I was her dear little sister-in-law. She taught me how to use face powder and a little rouge, applied with discretion and a rabbit's foot. It was thought in those days that ladies did not paint, but most of us did, with less skill than the others, who were called demi-mondaine and despised with a spice of envy. When Thunder saw the marriage settlement, he forgot any plans he made for me as a daughter-in-law. Chicago is more substantial than a favorite niece when it comes to repairing the gaps made by intensive gambling over 50 years. She asked me to be her chief bridesmaid. I was allowed to choose the bridesmaid dresses, or to be more accurate, I looked at the sketches that had been sent by Worth, and she very tactfully let me agree to the ones she had already selected. They went to Paris and the south of France for the honeymoon. She sent me a box of candied fruit and 24 lace handkerchiefs. I had 5 picture postcards from Hector. In many ways, Hector was extraordinarily guileless. He asked me to arrange the formalities of their return to Cloud 2 months later than they had first intended, for Emily wanted to see Florence and Naples. I put 4 vases of daffodils in their bedroom and almond blossom on the mantelpiece. There were primroses for the blue bowl on the chest of drawers in Hector's dressing room. I thought they would come by train, but then Hector telegraphed to say that they were arriving in an automobile. I could only prevent offence to Mr. Grant, the station master, by asking him to join the party of welcome at the castle. A car was still an event in the district, though it was understood that the Laird would not require a red flag on his own land. All the tenants wore their best clothes and were assembled in the courtyard. 3 of the stable boys were posted on the road to gallop ahead and warn us of their approach. Thunder asked me to stand with him by the front door. He was excited to see Emily. He believed in her too. Fancy Hector bringing home a wife, he kept on saying. He became a little senile before he died. Gout and whiskey are not a sensible mixture. And then the automobile came through the great gate, with a stranger steering and Emily sitting beside Hector, smiling as though she were royal, and yet shy of it. She only made one mistake. She took, very prettily, the bouquet a child gave her. I made it myself with the pink carnations from the greenhouse, and then she waited at the steps for Hector to carry her over the threshold. Apparently it's an American custom, which of course he had never heard about. He said, "What are you waiting for?" And everyone stared at her. She blushed, and I thought she was going to burst into tears. Then she ran into the hall and up to her room, and we all had to wait until she came back before the factor could read his address of welcome. In the distance, a gong boomed. "Lunch," said Georgina. "I have been disgracefully querulous." "What happened then?" said Rowan. "Some other time, if it becomes relevant. I only told you all of this to make you understand that it will not be easy for Janet. She is coming here today to stay for a few days. I should have warned Marylda. It may be awkward if they meet before I explain that I haven't told her. You are married." Chapter 6, Highland Welcome.